Hello, my name is Andrew Warner, and today I will be talking about the contribution from psychologist Herman George Canady. Herman George Canady was a black psychologist who lived from 1901 until 1970 in Oklahoma. He was a clinical and social psychologist who graduated from Northeastern University with a bachelor's degree in psychology. I will be showing you a video about Herman George Canady.
Herman George Canady, examining bias in IQ testing and paving the way for a more equitable field. Intelligence testing has been around since the early 1900s and continues to be widely used today. These tests aren't perfect, however, and have faced criticism ranging from discrimination to the promotion of eugenics. Intelligence testing has evolved but is still not without issues. One of the first people to study racial bias in IQ testing was psychologist and advocate Herman George Canady. Dr. Canady grew up in segregated Oklahoma, attending an all-black high school. He developed an interest in the social sciences while attending Northwestern's theology school and earned his Ph.D. at Northwestern in 1941. But Dr. Canady's experience in higher education looked much different than it would today. Many universities were just beginning to allow space for black students and scholars in a time when minority psychologists were blazing the trail for generations to come. Herman George Canady's early work focused on sources of bias in IQ testing and the possibility that an examiner's racial identity could be a contributing factor. Dr. Canady proposed that the rapport between examiner and examinee could impact the outcomes of IQ testing. He wanted to find out whether the race of the examiner had an effect on the IQ test results of black children, especially since testing was most often completed by white examiners at the time. This was the first study to look at racial differences between examiner and test taker as a possible factor in IQ testing and prompted a larger discussion on equitable testing environments. Herman George Canady went on to build a career that included several leadership positions. He served as chair of the psychology department at what is now West Virginia State College and earned several honors and awards throughout his career. He was involved in founding multiple organizations, including the West Virginia Psychological Association and the West Virginia State Board of Psychological Examiners. Dr. Canady used his position to advocate for the training of black psychologists. He did research on the training of psychology students at black institutions of higher education and pushed for greater inclusion of black psychologists, hoping to expand the focus of psychology to include the lived reality of black Americans. He continued this focus throughout his career and helped pave the way for the generation of today and those still to come.
Herman George Canady is best recognized for being the first psychologist to investigate how the race of the test proctor may create bias in IQ testing. George has a master's thesis on the effects of rapport on the IQ, a study in racial psychology. This thesis included recommendations for creating appropriate test environments. The West Virginia Psychological Association, the West Virginia State Board of Psychological Examiners, and the West Virginia Guidance Clinic were all founded by George Canady. He was also a strong supporter of the American Instructors Association, which was formed in response to the National Education Association's racist ban on black teachers. George Canady's contribution is recognized by society because all of his work that he did prepared universities of all kinds and the workforce to train and accept black psychologists. I'm really impressed by George's work. He really cares about the future of black people. What also impressed me is that he is the first psychologist to study how the race of the test proctor may create bias in IQ testing through his master thesis, The Effects of Rapport on the IQ, a study in racial psychology. George Canady opens up my understanding of the role of the examiner, proctor, and the IQ testing in regards to racial psychology.